I suppose I'm struck by a number of things in this report. The first is, look around you. I mean, this is supposed to be the burning issue of our times. It's supposed to be one of the burning issues of this government. It's not entirely clear to me from the report. There's a very slight discrepancy whether it's the third or the fourth highest emissions in our transport sector across the EU. So that being the case, it would seem to me that we need to reduce our emissions by a lot more in the transport sector, by a lot more than 51%. It seems to me that this has been approached from the premise that we'll reduce every sector by 51%. And that I disagree with, because we have to strategize on how we reduce emissions. Every sector is going to have to share the burden. I've no problem with that. And every sector is going to have to reduce emissions by a lot. But there is going to have to be a difference between the sectors, because simply put, a budget, if you have to trim spending, and I know Sinn Féin are talking about increasing taxation. There's never a talk of trimming spending. They will be in government pretty soon, I would have thought. When they get to go, it seems to me the current government is so, I was quite afraid that Sinn Féin will break the country when they get into power. So they're so afraid that they're going to break the country to avoid Sinn Féin getting into government in case they break the country. So in any event, by the time Sinn Féin get into power, the country will be pretty broke. There'll be very little money there, and they will have to find money in a way that I supported a government that had to find money. And it's pretty horrible, the options. It's bad and worse. They're the options. And it's a little bit like that with reducing emissions too. So when you're faced with the options of bad and worse, well, you have to be strategic. You have to protect that which you think is most important, and you have to trim where you think there are excesses. And I think the Dáil has to have a debate on this, a proper debate and a vote. Because if this is the burning issue of our times, well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Dave, sorry, I forgot yourself. You're here as well. 5 of us here before we finish up for the week. That's not reflective of it being the burning issue of our times. It's simply not. And it's equally carbon, the sectoral ceilings as they're set. There has to be a proper debate on that. Because I'm a farmer, I'm from an agricultural community. I represent Clare, which is where agriculture is an important facet of the economy. So maybe I'm biased. But equally, I would accept that agriculture, if we stop producing agricultural produce, well, then there's going to be a degree of displacement, isn't there? I mean, we're going to import more agricultural produce. I'm not saying that farmers should not reduce where possible, but we have to keep in sight the fact that there's a possibility that Brazil, Argentina, other countries will ramp up production to replace ours. So farmers and agriculture does need to reduce, but not by the same level as transport, because we have the highest emissions from our transport sector. We have very high emissions from our agriculture sector too in Ireland, higher than most other EU countries. But bearing in mind that most other EU countries are eating food produced in Ireland, whereas we're not, while we're driving cars produced in Germany, the manufacture of the car is not included in our emissions, it's included in the German emissions, just the emissions from the driving of it. So I think we should be more ambitious in our scope in reducing transport emissions. And I think our approach in Ireland is, let's penalise people who drive cars. Let's make it difficult for them without putting the alternative in place. I'd love to be going down to Houston Station now and hopping on a train to Ballybrophy, and at least not driving all the way to Clare, but driving only halfway to Clare. But the last train to Ballybrophy is gone. And that's not to Clare. I used to get the train from Burt Hill. You know this line well, Deputy Ledden, because it goes through Castleconnell and ultimately into Limerick. But then you had to get the train at 7 o'clock in Burt Hill to get to Dublin for 10. It used to be 8, but the speed limits on the line, etc. And they even had a change. It was like the Trans-Siberian Railway when they lifted off the thing and they changed the gauge and stuff. They had something a little, not quite as dramatic as that, but not that different in Neenah to make it even less attractive to get the train in Burt Hill if you wanted to go on to Dublin. So then instead of getting it in Burt Hill, which involved me driving a car which is empty other than myself, and maybe I'm way enough for two people, but that's a different issue. Instead of just driving to Burt Hill, I had to drive to Ballybrophy, which is halfway to Dublin. But even at that, you know, the service on that line is wholly inadequate. And it's not just about Burt Hill, it's about Neenah, it's about Rossgrey, it's about Castleconnell. And ultimately, it's about having a proper train service. And we need to put, if we want to shift people from cars into trains, cars into buses, we need to provide the alternative. And we're not doing that. And we need to subsidise it heavily. Maybe even make it free. You know, I'm not the first to suggest that, very far from it. My former constituency colleague and current fellow Oireachtas member, Timmy Dooley, also suggested, and it's a very good idea because we need to make it attractive to people, to get people into the idea of public transport, build up the number of people using public transport, and then make the case for further investment in public transport. But merely penalising people, to me, is not the solution.